Right now, at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, 3,000 of the most battle-hardened paratroopers on the planet are on standby. Their bags are packed, their parachutes are staged, and they are waiting for a single phone call that could send them hurtling toward Iranian soil within 18 hours. That call hasn't come yet, but every hour that passes, the chances of it happening grow higher. This isn't speculation. This is where the world is right now. It started before most of the world had even had their morning coffee. February 28th, 2026. Over 100 American aircraft, launched from 2 carrier strike groups in the Persian Gulf, formed what military officials described as a single synchronized wave. They weren't alone. Israeli jets were already in the air, having been quietly coordinated by U.S. intelligence. The target? Iran. The entire Islamic Republic. From its missile sites in the west to its naval installations along the Gulf, the operation had a name: Epic Fury. And it lived up to every single syllable of that title. In the first 12 hours alone, U.S. forces conducted 900 strikes on Iranian targets. To put that into perspective, the infamous shock and awe campaign that opened the Iraq War in 2003 has long been considered the gold standard for overwhelming air power. Operation Epic Fury delivered twice that firepower in the same window of time, and the most staggering detail of that first day wasn't even the bombs, it was who died in them. Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, the man who had controlled the Islamic Republic with an iron grip for over 3 decades, was killed in the opening hours of the strikes, the result of an Israeli operation supported by American intelligence. The head of one of the most militarized theocracies on earth was gone before the sun went down. The Trump administration had listed its objectives clearly: dismantle Iran's nuclear program, destroy its missile capability, neutralize its naval forces, and potentially bring about a regime change that would install a new government in Tehran. Some officials also quietly added another goal to that list: securing access to Iran's vast natural resources. The war, in other words, was never just about missiles. By the end of the first week, Iran's theater ballistic missile launches had been slashed by 86%. Their drone attack capacity had been cut by 73% from where it started. The White House was calling it a resounding success. Iran was calling it a massacre. But here's the thing: Iran wasn't done. Not even close. And what they did next would drag the entire global economy into the crossfire. 15 miles off the southwestern coast of Iran, sitting in the Persian Gulf like a small, heavily fortified cork in a massive bottle, is a piece of land that most people have never heard of. It's roughly 5 miles long. It has a small civilian population made up almost entirely of oil industry workers. It doesn't look like much, but Kharg Island controls approximately 90% of Iran's crude oil exports. 90%. If you want to strangle Iran's economy, you start there. President Trump understood that perfectly. On March 13, 2026, he ordered one of the most concentrated bombing raids ever conducted against a single location in the Middle East. U.S. forces hit more than 90 Iranian military sites on the island: air defense batteries, a naval base, an airport control tower, a helicopter hangar. The strikes were precise, calculated, and deliberate. And in a move that raised eyebrows across the military and intelligence communities, Trump ordered his pilots to hold back from hitting the oil infrastructure itself. His reasoning? Decency, he said. He wanted to preserve the oil pipelines, for now. But he also made it crystal clear that his restraint had an expiration date. If Iran didn't start behaving, he said, he would immediately reconsider and turn those oil facilities into rubble. The White House followed that up with a statement that left nothing to the imagination. The United States military can take out Kharg Island at any time. Not a threat delivered through diplomatic back channels. A public declaration. Broadcasted. Trump called Kharg Island Iran's crown jewel. And then he bombed its military installations right in front of the whole world and dared Iran to respond. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most critical waterways on the planet. At its narrowest point, it's barely 21 miles wide, and through that tight corridor, roughly 20% of the world's oil supply flows every single day. Shut it down, and you don't just hurt America, you hit Europe, Asia, the entire global economy. Iran knew this, and Iran used it. Here's what made Iran's move so remarkably effective and so deeply unsettling for military planners. They didn't use battleships. They didn't need a traditional naval blockade. They closed the Strait of Hormuz using cheap, mass-produced drones, swarms of them, hundreds at a time, hovering over the water, threatening any commercial vessel that tried to pass. And it worked. Shipping traffic in the strait dried up almost overnight. Oil prices blew through $100 a barrel. Fuel shortages began appearing across the globe by the start of week 3. Kuwait's Sheikh Nawaf al-Sabah, CEO of Kuwait Petroleum Corp., described the closure as beyond catastrophic and warned it would trigger a domino effect across the global economy. He wasn't exaggerating. By week 4, the war had fundamentally shifted. It was no longer just a military conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran. It had become a global economic crisis. And with every passing day that the strait stayed closed, the pressure on the Trump administration to force it open, by any means necessary, grew exponentially. Trump issued what amounted to an ultimatum. Open Hormuz in 2 days, he told Iran, or the United States would start targeting Iran's power plants. It was a level of escalation that markets immediately reacted to in horror. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte backed the war publicly and predicted the alliance would eventually come around to support it. But behind all the international posturing, inside the Pentagon, a much more specific and dangerous plan was already taking shape. Most people have a vague idea of what elite military units are: Special Forces, Navy SEALs, Army Rangers. But fewer people appreciate exactly what makes the 82nd Airborne Division different from every other combat force in the U.S. military. It isn't just their training, their toughness, or their history, though all of that is legendary going back to World War II. It's their speed. The 82nd Airborne maintains something called the Immediate Response Force. It's a brigade of roughly 3,000 soldiers stationed at Fort Bragg, and it exists for one singular purpose: to go anywhere on Earth, in any conditions, at any time, faster than any other ground force in the American military. We're talking deployment anywhere in the world in under 18 hours. They can parachute directly into a combat zone if no runway is available. They need no advanced setup. They hit hard, they hit fast, and they hit before the enemy has time to think. And as of this week, that force is being eyed for deployment to Iran. Senior Pentagon officials confirmed to the New York Times that no final order has been given, but they were equally clear that prudent planning is actively underway. In military language, prudent planning isn't idle chatter. It means target sets have been drawn up, logistics have been mapped, and the soldiers themselves are likely already being told to keep their bags close. The 82nd doesn't just show up. By the time the order is given, the plan is already finished. The fact that 3,000 of the world's fastest deploying combat soldiers are sitting on the edge of this decision tells you everything you need to know about where this conflict is heading. The plan being discussed in Pentagon and White House circles, according to multiple reports from Axios, the New York Times, Stars and Stripes, and others, involves taking control of Kharg Island, not just bombing it again, actually seizing it, putting American boots on Iranian soil and holding it. Here's how that might actually look. 3 Marine Expeditionary Units are already on their way to the region. Each MEU consists of roughly 2,500 Marines and their supporting ships. That's around 7,500 Marines converging on the Persian Gulf before a single paratrooper even leaves the runway at Fort Bragg. Retired Admiral James Stavridis, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, laid out the likely operational structure in a Bloomberg op-ed that's been making rounds in defense circles. The Marines, he said, would face their first test before they even reach Kharg Island. Their ships would need to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran would be waiting for them. Expect massive drone attacks, he said, small Iranian fast boats, some packed with explosives, potentially operating without crews, missiles coming in from the coastline. It would be a gauntlet. If the ships make it through, and Stavridis believes the U.S. military capability makes that likely, the assault on Kharg Island itself would almost certainly come from the air, not from a beach landing, but from above. CV-22 Ospreys and helicopters would carry the initial assault forces directly onto the island, bypassing the shoreline defenses entirely. Paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne could potentially jump directly onto target if conditions required. One senior administration official speaking to Axios summarized the timeline that's being floated inside the White House with an almost chilling casualness. We need about a month to further diminish the Iranians with strikes, seize the island, and then leverage that for negotiations. That quote is worth sitting with for a moment. They're not talking about whether to seize Kharg Island. They're talking about when. And they're already thinking about what they'll use it for afterward. Stavridis himself acknowledged that the operation carries significant risks and potential pitfalls. But he also noted that any Iranian ground forces still effective after the pre-assault strikes should be, and this is his word, easily overcome by the first waves of American forces. The wild card isn't the Iranian military. At this point, after 4 weeks of relentless bombing, it's been devastated. The wild card is Iran's unconventional capabilities, drones that cost a few $100s apiece, fired in overwhelming numbers, mines dropped in the water by small boats, missiles launched from hidden mobile platforms along the coast. The same cheap asymmetric toolkit that closed the strait in the first place could make the approach to Kharg Island a nightmare. The pressure inside the White House right now is enormous. The Strait of Hormuz has been effectively closed for weeks. Global fuel markets are in a state of crisis. Allied governments are watching. And Trump, who has staked enormous political capital on this war, is being squeezed from every direction. His public statements in recent days have been anything but subtle. He threatened to strike Iran's power plants. He issued what amounted to a 2-day deadline for Iran to reopen the strait. He ordered another round of strikes. And yet, as of this writing, the strait remains closed. Iran hasn't blinked. What makes this moment so volatile is what happens internally to a president who issues ultimatums that go unmet. Trump has built his political identity around projecting strength and follow-through. If Iran calls his bluff, again, the pressure to escalate becomes almost irresistible. not just politically, but militarily. U.S. Central Command has openly stated that the window to strike while Iran is at its weakest is right now. Every day the campaign continues without a decisive blow is a day Iran uses to reconstitute, regroup, and rearm. And then there's this. Pentagon lawyers have reportedly been consulted on the legality of occupying Kharg Island. That is not something you do during casual brainstorming sessions. Legal review means a decision is imminent or has already been made at the conceptual level. When the lawyers are involved, the generals and the politicians are already serious. One administration official's statement to Axios might be the most revealing thing said publicly about where this is all heading. He wants Hormuz to be accessible. If it requires taking Kharg Island to achieve that, then that will occur. If he opts for a coastal invasion, that will happen as well. Kuwait's warning about a domino effect across the global economy isn't rhetorical. 20% of the world's oil flows through that strait every single day. Japan depends on it, South Korea depends on it, India depends on it. European nations that were already dealing with energy instability from previous crises are now watching fuel costs climb at a rate that's impossible to sustain. Some countries have been quietly allowed safe passage by Iran, a carefully calculated move designed to fracture the international coalition supporting the U.S. operation. Tehran is playing a diplomatic chess game even as its military is being systematically taken apart. NATO's backing of the war, despite early skepticism from several member states, has shifted the geopolitical calculus significantly. Secretary General Rutte's endorsement wasn't just symbolic. It signals that the Western alliance, however reluctantly, is lining up behind the American operation, and that in turn makes a ground operation politically easier to execute. The more institutional cover Trump has, the fewer constraints he faces. Meanwhile, Iran's capacity to resist has been genuinely and severely degraded. Missile launches are down 86% from day one. Drone attacks have been cut by nearly 3/4. The country's air defense infrastructure has been systematically dismantled. What remains is a battered, dispersed force relying on guerrilla-style tactics. Exactly the kind of threat that's hardest to neutralize with air power alone. That's the argument being made internally for why ground forces are necessary. Air power can destroy infrastructure. It can kill commanders. It can crater runways and silence radar stations, but it can't hold territory. It can't control a strait. It can't sit on Kharg Island and say, "Not one barrel of oil moves unless we say so." Only boots on the ground can do that. And right now, the boots are packed and ready at Fort Bragg. Here's where this leaves us. Operation Epic Fury began on February 28th. In roughly 4 weeks, the United States has killed Iran's supreme leader, obliterated the country's primary military infrastructure, bombed the island that controls nearly all of its oil revenue, and watched oil prices blow past $100 a barrel as the global economy starts to groan under the weight of a closed strait. And now, the immediate response force of the 82nd Airborne Division, 3,000 men who can be boots down in a hostile combat zone anywhere on Earth in under 18 hours, is sitting on a runway waiting for a decision that may already have been made. The question isn't really whether America will try to seize Kharg Island. Multiple administration officials have said, in as many words, that it will happen if that's what it takes to reopen Hormuz. The question is whether it will happen while Iran is maximally weakened, or whether a delay gives Tehran the breathing room to reconstitute just enough capability to make the landing a bloodbath instead of a controlled operation. History doesn't always announce itself clearly. Sometimes it just happens, quietly, suddenly, in a move that looks inevitable only in hindsight. But every now and then, the pieces line up so obviously, so publicly, that anyone paying attention can see exactly what's coming before it arrives. Marines steaming toward the Gulf, paratroopers on standby at Fort Bragg, Pentagon lawyers reviewing the legality of occupation, a president who just gave Iran 2 days to comply and received no answer.